If you've been with us here the past few weeks, we've been going through this series called The King, the Cross and the Tomb. So last week we had a sermon done by John, and it was on the King. This was a recount of Palm Sunday, where Jesus came into Jerusalem as a triumphant king on a donkey and symbolizing who he is. And then for those of you who were there last night, something that stood out to me as we were contemplating this leading up to this moment of the cross, is that Jesus, he wasn't just this meek figure, but rather we are talking about the King of the universe, the creator, the one that holds everything together, that there is this sense that of this like awesomeness of who God is. So then we come to today, when we kind of change gears a little bit. Whilst we've been focusing on who Jesus is, and whilst that'll still obviously come up today, what I want to focus on today is the work that he did on the cross. So we're at the business end of this series, Christ's work on the cross, and why is it so significant? So over this series, we are sitting with the introduction of Hebrews, and it's got these 4 punchy verses, and it's written to these people, this audience that were weary by their faith because of this existing threat that they had for death over their faith because of this persecution that they were experiencing. That in this threat, in this pressure, they were tempted to ignore the work of the cross and the resurrection and to turn back to the old ways taught by Moses and how to make themselves right before God through the gift of the sacrificial system. But this pressure to ignore the significance of the cross in our lives is not one that is left in the 1st century AD. It's one that I think we can carry into our lives today. That this definite moment, this line in the sand moment that we have in our lives, that it can be clouded by pressures to either, maybe unmet desires or things that you're pursuing or things that you're wanting or things that maybe some difficult pressures that you're experiencing in your relationships. That these pressures can all cloud what the significance of the cross was for us. So like these 1st century listeners, is there things for you that are clouding your faithfulness to Christ? But something that might have hit home a little bit more to this original audience that may not sit fully well today, but hopefully we can kind of get there, is this argument that he uses. First of all, he displays how Christ is greater than that, as we talked about before, that he's the king, he's the creator, he's the one that holds the world together. And then just as these people, as like a remedy to their weary hearts, to say who Christ is, they also needed just as much to hear what Christ has done. And the words that they needed to hear, we see in Hebrews 1 verse 3, where it says that he had provided purifications for sins. I don't know the last time that you used the word purification in a sentence. I think the way that we understand purification maybe might be like cleaning something, to make something, to take away the impurities of it. And there's definitely that idea here. But maybe this idea of purification might not have been the trump card that the Hebrew author intended it to be for us. But I think if we sit with this idea, we can actually see that there is so much to be confident about with what this idea of purification is. Because the point that I'm wanting to come to today is how, because Jesus died on the cross and because of this purification, that we can confidently know that we can sit in the presence of God and that we can know him, which is the very thing that we're made for. See, what the Hebrew listeners are catching on to, and what might be, for me, as I first read this, went a little bit over my head, is that purification is deeply rooted in their worldview, and their worldview was constructed with what we have as the Old Testament. That before Christ, God had made this way for this people to be in proximity with him, that by his grace he allowed them to have this system called the sacrificial system, that the idea of it is that this life source blood would be spilled on behalf of them. So there was all these different offerings, whether it's blood or even grain, that it would be taken and offered to God as a replacement for their sins. And by this, they were able to exist in relationship with God. But the whole narrative of the Old Testament, as we're pretty sure here in this room, is that doesn't work out so great, because in our humanity, we can't fix ourselves. So it has this extra layer of what they call the ceremonial uncleanness, which for me was the foreign part of the idea of purification. But I was trying to think of like a way to describe like ceremonial uncleanness, and the thing that kind of came to my mind was, it kind of captures a little bit the idea. So a few weeks back, I was at home, and we've got front lounge room, and then the door that you come through, it's just the entrance way. But it's very cozy, very comfy. I really love that room. Great place to like read or just like chat to people. And as this room is usually one that I enjoy and enjoy spending time in. However, a few weeks ago, a little friend appeared, not so much a friend, but I reckon it was a spider like the size of my hand. I'm not exaggerating. Like, I think it was like legitimately that big that popped up on the window. And for me, that room became like untouchable for like days. The spider has not been found. It has disappeared, which is a whole nother kettle of fish. But I had this room and this sense of there is no way, this space that I once enjoyed, I can no longer enjoy because there is the presence of this unwanted thing there. And so I think in a similar sense, we were made for relationship with God, to worship him, to have our lives aligned with his will, living with him. But then there was the fall and the presence of evil that came as this impurity in our relationship with God. And God, being holy and just, couldn't be in the presence with that impurity. So here we have this idea that we see in Paul in Romans when he talks about the wages of sin is death. That it's not just some little part of our lives, but actually what we learn is that it's actually a fundamental part of our standing with God. And you see this tension throughout the Old Testament, that this lingering problem of a God who desires to connect and wanting to know us, but has this lingering problem of what to do with this sense of impurity in humanity's world. There's this funny little story which kind of highlights this, of just an off comment in Leviticus 16, where it talks about how Aaron's sons tried to get into the presence of God, but because they weren't clean, they died. So it's this idea of the seriousness of this condition. But to where there was the seriousness of the condition and to where we couldn't fix ourselves, here we come to the work of Jesus and why it's so important. That just like in the sacrificial system, there might be this moment of relief, of being able to be right with God, what Jesus did was totally cover us And if we go back to the 7 words of the verse that we're looking at today, when it speaks about that he had made purifications, that it's talking about this one moment, not this continuing sense of what we have to keep doing like they used to. So the work of the cross is where Jesus becomes this perfect sacrificial lamb to make amends for us to be cleaned so that we are able to come into his presence and know him. But this is probably not new to majority of us in the room here, but I think a healthy reminder, because I think it can show up in our faith. That just like the Hebrews, when other pressures come into the way and we start to lose sight of the sheer importance of the cross and the resurrection, that it can affect our walk with him. So this idea of purity, a way to think of it is I was thinking about the idea of like purifying gold. So gold, as you know, like can come with like different imperfections, and it can have it's not in its like intended state. Like it's the best state is without the impurities, but gold can't fix itself. It can't take its own impurities out. But through a master craftsman coming in, applying pressure and heat, it can scrape away the impurities, and from that moment, the gold is at a completely different state. And I think this is the work of the cross that we're talking about with purification. It's this moment that we're justified, that our state is changed, and something that we can be confident of because our state has changed, we can enjoy the presence of Christ. And so what a wonderful thing that is in past tense, that verse. That he has made this purification for us, that we can find a way to stand before Christ in this way. But what does this matter? And how does this show up in our lives? I think sometimes I've seen in my life, and I've seen in the lives of some people around me, like the majority of us, all of us, that sometimes we can think in different situations that we might need something more than we need what the work of the cross was. Like, for example, that we might think that we need, we might need this like career promotion, or we might need this relationship, or we might need whatever it is that comes to your mind. Ultimately, it's not saying that those things aren't meaningful. They're meaningful, but what this is saying that ultimately that we can know that we truly are okay because of the work of this cross and the work of Jesus' sacrifice. And so I wonder for you here today, as we come on an abnormal day, on a Friday, to come and think of the work of the cross, to see its importance in our lives, and to see it as this one moment that changed everything for us. What might it be for us that we can come to him and go that, Jesus, you are greater than this thing? So let's pray. Jesus, thank you for all that you did on that cross. Jesus, we just come to you now with our open hearts, Lord, and just ask for you to speak to us and for you to draw us closer to you and to have a deeper sense of the significance of the work of that day all those years ago. God, we're just thankful for what you did. We're also not ignorant to what's coming in 3 days' time. So God, we have such a sense of hope for what you have done and what you will do in our lives. So we give it to you, Jesus, in your name. Amen.